if there is a continuity of life after death, and this is the idea that we will bring across today, if there is a continuity, then the context of life changes profoundly. And if we understand life, this one terrestrial life, in the context of a larger existence where we have a continuity, the sense, the meaning of this life changes profoundly. And if that understanding is valid, profound, harmonious, it will make already this life full of vigor, full of meaning, full of harmony, full of peace, and a true transformation, a true evolution. Now, we covered in this series, so there's a whole series about beyond, all the different afterlife and astral world testimonies that we find from different sources. So if we want to understand, now we are alive, the world after death is invisible for us, and if we want to understand what is there, we take, this is the suggestion and the invitation of this lecture, is to take, not in a dogmatic way, not in a blind belief way, but in an open, scientific, profound and heartful way, the different testimonies, from the Egyptian Book of the Dead to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, from the testimonies of Emanuel Swedenborg to the different testimonies that appear in, for example, the Gospel of Nicodemus or the Garuda Purana in India, to the descriptions of near-death experience, to the descriptions of or the scientific research of reincarnation, to the literature of Belok, which is a kind of near-death experience in Tibet that has been gathered for a very, very long time. If we take a synthesis of all of it, that will give us, the closest view to a reality. And for me personally, this is my go-to. I looked at all of that, and instead of finding some petty differences, which is normal to find different cultural differences, but rather to extract the similar essence of all of them and see some very, very clear guidelines of what will happen later. In the 20th century, they were, let's say, monumental when it comes to sources of information about the afterlife. And maybe the afterlife and what is called the astral world, there are a few very important figures. Sundar Singh, the Sikh that turned Christian, Chico Xavier, the medium, Monroe with his experiments with different brainwaves and astral projection, and perhaps the most important is Sri Yukteswar and his by now famous momentary resurrection, where he appeared to his disciple Yogananda. Chapter 43 of the book Autobiography of a Yogi, perhaps arguably the most important biography of a yogi of the 20th century, maybe one of the three most important spiritual books written in the 20th century. Steve Jobs, when he died, he gave as a gift to everybody that came to the funeral this book, because it's very, very important. Perhaps just before we enter this resurrection of Sri Yukteswar, it's important to understand that we are not speaking of some petty charlatans, we are not speaking of some petty hippies, but of great spirits. So Yogananda himself, he was perfectly healthy. So Yogananda, the author and the disciple of Yukteswar, we will describe Yukteswar's testimony in a moment. Yogananda was perfectly healthy, and he was giving a speech in the new Indian embassy in the United States. This is a little bit after India was formed, the 7th of March, 1952. And he told his disciples, I want to leave this world when I speak about India and my America. And then even he was in perfect state of health and not old, he told his disciples, it's a matter of hours before I leave this world. And he gave his speech, and he finished his speech and rolled his eyes, and the body fell. And that was Yogananda's passing of this world. Now his cousin came from India. They were very close, so they kept the body, they didn't bury it so that his cousin can see. And the body did not rot one bit, did not smell one bit, did not dry. He looked like he was sleeping. There is, in the end of the book, you can read, you can find it on the internet, the description from the cemetery of Los Angeles, and the guy said, the man in the cemetery, that's his job, working with corpses, says, never, ever, ever before have I seen somebody for 21 days like this. And then his coffin was covered. Maybe he's still like that, yeah? Padre Pio, for example, was taken out of his grave decades after, and his body also was not corrupt. This is something that happens to people on that spiritual level. And there are people that doubt everything that yogis and saints and masters, that they say, no, they doubt, they do it for money, they do it for fame, it's all trickery. Well, that would be one heck of a trick, to be able to die like that and to have your body preserved after death. Yeah, there's also Sri Aurobindo's body was emitting blue light for 4 days. Tens of thousands of people came to see him. I take this as a great sign of reliability, of the greatness of the disciple, in this case Yogananda. Yogananda loved his guru Sri Yukteswar. Sri Yukteswar was already not well and on his deathbed. And he told Yogananda, go to, there's a festival, Kumbh Mela, go there, don't worry about me. Yogananda left. Sri Yukteswar left his body, what is called Mahasamadhi, and Yogananda was heartbroken that he could not be there for the last moment with his guru. A few months later, Yogananda has a vision of Krishna. He said, Krishna was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. Krishna smiled and disappeared, and I somehow understood something amazing is going to happen. Yogananda was in his room, and he said, suddenly the room was filled with light. I was utterly amazed. What was before sunlight became this tremendous spiritual light, an ecstatic light. And from that light appeared Yukteswar. And he was just utterly amazed, utterly emotional, not so coherent, slightly confused. And he embraced Yukteswar, and he could touch him, he could touch the body, and he was very, very emotional. This is an exceptional accomplishment, to be able to, after dying, to condense a body and return. And of course, there is the most famous resurrection of Christ as it is described in the Gospels, and that his disciples can see him and see the wounds. Thomas, that was skeptical, saw the wounds. And we have another occasion in the 20th century with the great Swami Shivananda. So Shivananda passed away, and just shortly after passing away, he appeared to Satyananda, to one of his main disciples, and told him his spiritual mission. And Satyananda, in his testimony, says, I touched his feet. There were feet there. It was not an etheric vision. It was not a vision in my inner eye. I touched it. The body can condense up to this degree. There are also some testimonies of Shirdi Sai Baba appearing after death in a tangible form. So these three we see in the 20th century, to my knowledge. If you know more, please in the comments share, and share also links, reliable, please. So Yukteswar comes back, and this, what he gives there, chapter 43 of Autobiography of a Yogi, a real must. You can see it on YouTube, the whole chapter, 40-something minutes. Please listen to the original. This is a teaser, which I hope will make you interested. You can also buy the book, you can also find it PDF, everything for free, whatever, read it. It's exceptional. If you want to understand life and death, and life and death, and what happens here and what happens after. Yukteswar comes back, and he describes to him how does the world look. And this description of Yukteswar is, in my opinion, much more valuable than the description of people with near-death experience. Normally, near-death experience is short. Half an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours. It's true, it's verifiable, about 20%. Yeah, if we look at the scientific research, 20% of the near-death experience are verifiable. That is, they saw something here while their body was dead, and they said, look, I saw the doctor said this, and it's verifiable, and it's correct. Is a lot of testimonies today, numerous, all sorts of famous neurologists and scientists that had near-death experience and so forth. By now it is an undeniable phenomena. Best research, Pim van Lommel, you can read proper scientific research on it. This is valuable, but this is just a few hours in death, or a day or 2 or 3 or 5 in coma. I personally interviewed somebody who was a month and a half in and out of coma, and I heard some very amazing descriptions of the world beyond. But it's always the waiting room, because this form of the body is still kept. So they are still in the waiting room between life and death. Yukteswar was long gone over there, and he describes the whole process exceptionally. Now, we can find such exceptional descriptions also in the writings of Sundar Singh, also in the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, but they were seeing visions. This was a manifestation condensed to the physical world that gives a very, also Chico Javier gives such explanations, but Yukteswar's testimony is, in my opinion, the most important, especially that it comes from such a reliable spiritual giant as Yukteswar, and described by another spiritual giant, humble and pure, reverent soul of Yogananda, which I deeply love. So he describes what? He describes different worlds, different astral worlds, lower worlds where people with a lot of violence and a lot of negative tendencies, and they are stuck there. They cannot go anywhere else. They are stuck there to be with more violent beings, and they have all sorts of wars and all sorts of means of violence, exhausting that particular karma, and they will go back to earth shortly after. He describes higher worlds where more evolved beings that are less attached to the material world, that are more virtuous, that are more peaceful, that are more harmonious, that have a greater connection to God. He's very non-cultural. He does not speak at all, like it's not a Hindu God that he speaks of, or a Hindu afterlife. He speaks very objective, in a very non-cultural way. It's very good. You can listen to the chapter. Even he himself comes from the Hindu tradition, and he does speak of terms such as karma, the astral world, and the causal world, but he does not stick to a very limited, dogmatic Hinduism, but speaks in a very objective and large form to be understood by all. Mentions also Christ. And the higher beings, they can travel more, and he himself is in one of the highest planes of the astral world, a place called Hiranya Loka. Hiranya means golden. The golden Loka is a space or dimension, is like a planet, where very, very high beings that have attained in the physical life Nirvikalpa Samadhi, so a very profound state of enlightenment, they go there and they still have what to learn. So they still have a bit of astral karma, and they will go to what is called the causal world. The causal world is a world of very, very high, elevated ideas. It is way beyond what is called the astral world. The astral world is the world of thought, of colors, is where you go, where you dream. That is the astral world. But beyond that, there is a world and a dimension which is almost inconceivable for people. Here he says, you need to be able to focus. If you want to understand even what the causal world is, you need to be able to focus to such a degree that in your concentration you can contain a universe. Imagine that you visualize a ping pong ball and 2 ping pong balls, or that you visualize your building, you're an architect and you're visualizing a house. Imagine you can visualize 100 houses or 500 houses. This is the amount of concentration, this is the mental strength required to conceive the causal world. So he is there in Hiranyaloka, and he is helping very high spiritual accomplished people to get even more accomplished, to let go of the astral world and to enter the causal world. So he describes and he gives this metaphor. The physical world, the physical universe is quite small. It's like a basket of a hot air balloon. The astral world is much greater. It's like the balloon of a hot air balloon. And the causal world is like the sky. It is tremendous. Now, where we have our desires, our fears, and our unfinished businesses, there we will go. If we have a lot of desires to play more video games, to watch more porn, to have more sex, to have more validation, to be rich and famous, or to revenge, we just can't forgive this person, then we will reincarnate and revenge. Yeah, Terminator, something. We go there and we revenge. Because the desire is so strong, we cannot stay too long in the astral world. So when we die, we go to the astral world, and if we have a lot of desires for the physical world, we will return to it. And according to our desires and fears and our unpaid debts, our karmic debts, that will determine our next life. You leave this world, and some angel, to put it like that, asks you, did you have enough of this physical world? And you say, I think I could have a little bit more sex and a bit more validation. He says, okay, you can reincarnate again. And you go again. He says, look, we have a spot in North Korea and a spot in Afghanistan. Enjoy. As long as we feel attracted to this world, to the physical world, and we have a lot of desires and fears, we will return here. And once we become desireless and we kind of finalized our experience and paid our debt and did good and loved and found peace, and we don't feel attracted to such experiences anymore, then we will stay for a very long time in the astral world, or even become completely free from the physical world, which means we are not obliged to ever take a physical body again, but we can return in order to help humanity. It's like a voluntary incarnation. This is also described in the books of Chico Javier. As you can be free from the physical world, you can also be free from the astral world. So the astral world with all its experiences and colors and lights, so there you don't experience the light of food and I don't know what. You have food in the astral world, you can produce it also, higher astral beings. Yukteswar says you can just produce a mango and then eat it. But they are mostly fed from vibrations, Yukteswar described. They listen to the music of the spheres, they enjoy all sorts of harmonies, and as long as they have a desire to stay there, they would live. Yukteswar says higher astral beings would live 500, 1,000 years on the astral world, and then they would either return to the physical world if they have still karma, or they would rise to the causal world, to this world of pure ideas, a little bit similar to what in Neoplatonism is described as the nous, and a little bit in Plato's cave you find some of that ideas of this world of truth, where there is the archetypical essential ideas of all creation. So such beings would leave behind the world of mental form, which is the astral world, and go to the pure ideas of the causal world. And he's basically there as a guru in such a high spiritual place in Hiranyaloka, and he's teaching people or beings to detach from the astral world and go to the causal. But the causal world he describes is not the end. Also from the causal world one can be liberated and then enter the infinity of the Absolute. And this, let's say, this mode is actually, even it's very, very ancient. In India, we find it developed, particularly from the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, also in Europe, and then it kind of entered through Neoplatonism, through Plotin, particularly to the ideas that define many aspects of Kabbalah and the ideas that define many aspects of esoteric Christianity and Islam. We find the one absolute that cannot be described, and then from there descend all sorts of attributes. You can also find it in Spinoza's writing, these godly attributes. And from there appears all sorts of things which are equivalent-ish to the causal world, the nous in Neoplatonism, and you find similar ideas in Islam and Christianity, in Kabbalah. There is this question of the gap. How do you connect infinity with finitude, the absolute with limitations? And they are intermediary, like Sephirot in Judaism, or the 9 hierarchies of angels described, particularly Pseudo-Dionysus, connecting the high and the low. So over there, Yukteswar describes it as the causal world. And my personal view is these things, they are not excluding each other, but they are, because that reality is very abstract and not so easy to verbalize, the verbalization of it by all these spiritual giants that I mentioned, the verbalization of it, whether you read Ibn Arabi or you read the Zohar or you read the Christian texts of Pseudo-Dionysus or others, they are describing similar realities that they would enter in a certain mystical exaltation where their ignorance would be removed and they would see these subtle planes, and then they're able to return and explain it in these terms. So basically the understanding of Yukteswar, and perhaps we will make another video on it, the understanding of this message gives us the possibility to understand where we stand and what is our goal and why does all this make sense, and what in the context of this repeated incarnation does not make sense. If we live this life and this world in order to rise our consciousness to higher and higher dimensions, to become freed from desire, freed from anger, freed from vices, full of love, full of meaning, full of virtue, full of giving to others, peaceful, detached, then we will be less and less tied to this world. And we will be able to experience higher and higher planes after we pass away. It's not a simplified, do good, go to heaven to all eternity, do bad, go to hell to all eternity. It's a nuanced, there are many, 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 many levels of heavens, many, 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 many hells. Yeah? Also in the Christian tradition, Paul says, I arrived to the third heaven, which is again, it's from the Kabbalistic, or not Kabbalistic, Jewish mystical, Merkava teachings. Yeah, there are all sorts of planes over there, and one will arrive if one is very pure in this life. And if we are not pure, and many of us are not, and that's our starting point, then we can purify. And every step that we make on the way, every time we forgive, every time we love, every time we do something of purpose, of service, every time we meditate, every time we pray, every time we do any form of authentic spiritual practice, every time we show kindness, every time our mind is quiet, every time we go deep into our spiritual practice of meditation or prayer, we are making a step that would be meaningful for this life, but also for the future and future and future and future. And with this understanding, which for me, now I read this 24 years ago, for me this was groundbreaking. This I can subscribe to. This I understand. And I live my life according to that. I am preparing my future existences. This makes sense. And this doesn't make my life now a sacrifice, and it will not make anyone's life a sacrifice. Because basically, instead of just living for petty desires, petty fears, petty revenge, We live to enter a certain universal harmony. We live for love, we live for peace, we live for service. And then this life becomes great. A life with a quiet mind, a life full of spiritual practice, a life full of giving, a life full of love, a life full of forgiveness is an excellent life already here. But to get resources to make such a transformation, you don't just make the transformation for this life. You make the transformation for your existence as that existence will manifest on and on and on. So I strongly recommend to read this chapter and the general sources that we have mentioned here and to understand. In my opinion, really, if you read enough with an open mind and an open heart and make a synthesis of all of it, is obvious. And if it's obvious that there is a continuity after death, then take responsibility. And if you take proper responsibility for what happens after death, you will see how this life becomes great. Not just for you, but that you become a facilitator of something great for other people. Because you connect not just to your ego, but for your soul. Because that's what continues. The ego is forgotten. Also language often is forgotten, the mind is forgotten, the body is gone. But some essential aspect that makes all of this meaningful continues. And that's what it's about. If you like this video and want to learn more about Tantra, about yoga, about psychology, emotional healing, lives of saints and the scriptures,
then hit the bell, like, subscribe, and you'll never miss an upload. Thank you so much.